Hello, welcome to the meeting tent, an ongoing discussion of the work of Stan Tenen. Before we get started, I'd like to introduce our usual cast of characters: Michael Andron, Levanah Tenen, Daniel Gill, and Adele Packer. So today we're going to continue on the discussion we started a few episodes in terms of looking at the alphabet meanings as Stan developed it. And we're going to go through 3 letters, maybe 6, but I doubt it. But before we do that, I have a little treat. Now, this is what I'm going to call a blast from the past, or you could call it Stan Tenen trivia. So, Levanah, you're going to enjoy this, I hope. Back in the late 60s, there was a television show called The Prisoner. This was a from BBC, and they showed it in America. It had to be the most esoteric TV show ever made. And so it played in America in the 60s. Then in the 70s, and Levanah will fill this in after, they replayed it on the local PBS station, KQED. Somehow, and the fact that, so on PBS, there's no commercials, so they have this space of time to fill up within the hour. Somehow, Stan wriggled his way in and became the host of the program.
I can say how later.
Yeah. And so at the end of the program, after it was over, Stan would come out, and with usually it was just he and one, sometimes 2 other people, and sometimes Levanah was there, and would talk about it, would talk about this program. And I've got to say, just a little personal note. So I'm sitting there changing channels on my little black and white TV one night, and there were only 4 or 5 channels, in San Francisco at the time with my antenna. And I come on channel 9, and there is this guy talking about this TV show. And I was familiar with the show. It had to, I couldn't watch more than 10 minutes of this program. I can't, you go on YouTube, you'll see what I mean.
What was it called?
It was called The Prisoner. The Prisoner with Patrick McGoohan. Patrick McGoohan was a British star.
I remember that.
He also had a show called Secret Agent. But this one was even more esoteric. And there's Stan talking about this show, and I had no idea what he's talking about, but he was so into it. And so sometimes I think this program is like that. People are watching, have no idea what we're talking about, but we're so into it that it just keeps you, fascinated. So let me go ahead and play this clip. And then there's one other comment I want to make, and then I'll turn it over to Levanah. Hold on.
The important thing about the series is how it lays bare all of these things to the emotions below. You can see how a spy would see the world as the village, if you look from a spy's point of view. That person's feelings ultimately are what enable them to be free or not, and not the government. You're never going to beat the government. The government is always going to have rules and regulations that somebody doesn't like, eventually you. The post office is always going to add 4 digits to the zip code. It's going to go on forever. I don't know how many numbers you already have. You're going to get more. That's not the way to freedom. Freedom doesn't come from hijacking an airplane or blowing up the bad government or anything else. It comes from changing your own internal mechanism, way of seeing the world. And when the glasses in front of your eyes are free, rather than spy-colored or rose-colored even, then you can be free. And that emotional connection, I think, is what you can see in these episodes, and that's where I'm coming from. But the other political and social level is all true. A lot more is too. You've got some letters there?
Yeah, I have a letter that actually speaks to that. Even though I agree with you. I have a letter here from someone who is upset by that viewpoint, in that he says, I'm uncomfortable with taking responsibility in the Esther Gestalt sense for the whole world around him. because this begins to sound like blaming the victim. I and many others are victims, and I don't think that we can change the power structure because we carry the means of our oppression with us. Basically, what he's saying is that, yeah, there's internal stuff, but there's external stuff out there too, and how do you resolve this?
Interesting. And then the other comment, and this is where it becomes kind of relevant, is if you watch the video, the first verse on our website, or Geometric Metaphors of Life, Stan begins by saying, I was sitting in my apartment in Newton, Massachusetts, and I had this strange urge to look at the first verse of Genesis. What he doesn't say is that he was watching The Prisoner, and there was an episode that spurred him on to go to his closet, look for the chumash that he got for his bar mitzvah, and look at the first verse. So watching The Prisoner started this whole thing at that point. So Levanah, tell us.
That was several things resulted from that. One of them being a class that he taught at the Fort Mason was open to classes. At any rate, just a side note, the way that we wound up being able to do that that program, which was, there was like 10 minutes after the broadcast of the show, The Prisoner, and then we also did an additional 20 minutes, which would be after the rebroadcast of that week's episode on, midnight on Sunday night or some bizarro time, when they had 20 minutes to spare. Basically, we first got involved doing that because, of course, this was a big deal. It wasn't just our local station. It was like a PBS rollout of The Prisoner. They were going to do this cult favorite series, which was very popular in the late 60s, early 70s. And they were doing fundraisers, and they needed something to fill up the fundraiser. So, we auditioned for it in a sense. I mean, we wrote to the guy who was in charge of it, and he said, yeah, sure, come on in, talk about The Prisoner. So we did that a couple of times. And then basically what happened was that the PBS rollout of the series of The Prisoner also included a 10-minute explanation of what was going on from somebody, some psychologist based in LA, and the San Francisco people looked at this presentation and said, OMG, our audience is going to laugh themselves silly at this guy. What have we got that we can do instead for these 10 minutes that are going to be sitting there at the end of the program? So we said, hi, we'll come in and do it. So we did. We did that for, I think, 2 separate runs of The Prisoner that they did. It is a very esoteric program, and you can read a whole lot of stuff into it. It's a whole subject in and of itself. But one of the things that you can, follow and read into it is a series of personal growth, philosophical statements about freedom, about choice, about being aligned with your own principles. And so, yeah.
Hey, Levanah, what do you know what episode he was watching that spurred him on?
It was Do Not Forsake Me, Oh My Darling. The episode was centered around, there was a code that had to be found and entered, and I forget the exact details, but basically the episode focused on a code. It was unusual in several ways, which Prisoner fans will know and nobody else will care about. But the idea that it had to do with a code kind of sparked his curiosity.
Wow. Yeah, amazing. And so that's kind of how it all started, with the code.
Well, it all started at the Kotel, at the Western
That's
Wall.
right. But this was
But
a year
this was
later,
this was
right?
a year later.
Yeah, almost very close in time,
Yeah.
in a year later. So,
And
so
the
there,
tape that you showed was a few years later than that.
yeah, I think it was close to the end because there were more people at that.
Well, it was we didn't. There were always like at least four people on that round table.
Oh,
There were
okay,
never just the two of us.
right.
Um, and so we had different guests each week. Um, and frankly, I would be curious to see the rest of that tape, Bill.
Okay,
And
well,
how you still
I've got
remember.
it. Yeah, I've got that one. Unfortunately, I didn't have a copy of Forsake Me, so I don't know. I know a lot of them are available on YouTube, so it might be worth checking out to see if that episode and go through it and find, you know, I think I've done it. I don't know. In any case, that was, yeah, little bit of trivia there. So
I mean, the exchange between the two was unbelievable. I mean,
yeah,
that question, and then your question. I mean, that letter, and then the question and what he said. It's like so deep, I mean, I don't know how many of you have heard of Viktor Frankl.
sure, yeah.
Yeah. So that, I mean, that's what Stan said has a lot to do with what Viktor Frankl, he was a Holocaust survivor, actually talked about
Yeah,
in terms
yeah.
of dealing with pain and real problems, beyond
Yeah,
real
I
problems.
mean, at some point, I could post those up on YouTube so people can, get a better grasp. But if you're curious about the program itself, it is available on YouTube. So,
Yeah.
okay, so let's go on. We're going to continue our discussion of the three layers of meaning that Stan developed. And here it is. Again, you can see that they're, the fortunate aspect of the alphabet that are 27. So that fits into a 3 by 3 by 3 matrix. And this is the way Stan developed it in terms of three levels: the outer, the inner. I mean the archetype, the inner and the outer. And so today we're going to pick up with Dalet, the fourth letter. And if you look down, you see Dalet, Mem, and Tav. And so let's see what Stan has to say about those three letters. Now we're taking this from a video that was done, a studio video in 1990. And we've talked about this before, where he had developed the system. So let's take a look.
The next layer, come on, get in the right order, is Dalet, Mem, and Tav, D, M, and T. Dalet, pronounced D, means a door. As a prefix, it can mean that. English would be dilute, dole, dale, a delta. Delta is in fact the name of the letter in Greek. It means a fanning out, an outpouring, a dissipation, an opening up, a division. These single river divides up into the sea. The flow spreads out. A portal, an opening to pour out. It means in Hebrew, it designates both pour, P-O-O-R, and probably the sense of pouring, of loss, of dissipation. It's that kind of pour. Dal means pour in Hebrew. O-O-R, pour. And so here we have the basic idea of division, of separation, of dissipation. Okay? Remember, the bait was distinction. This is division, a higher level, a more specific kind of distinction. And we're going to see how that works in a minute. Mem, the next level, if Dalet itself is a distinction, that is an outpouring, a spreading out, an opening up, so to speak, this portal, then to open up from the inside, from within, that's Mem. Mem, pronounced M, means water, sea, mother in Hebrew. As a prefix, it means from or from within. The cognates in our language, in English, would be mom, or om, or aum, or ma'am, meaning a mother, an expanse, a fountain, a manifold, the sea, this yam and mayam is water and sea in Hebrew. Inner division, separation from within. And a chink is another meaning for the word mum or mom. I don't remember how it's made. It would be equivalent to our word maim. That imperfection that is in fact the womb of life. Life forms in the interface, in the chink. And that's the inner dissipation, the inner opening, the inner portal, the womb. T, at the outside, the external level, tav, pronounced T, TH, TH, S. It could also have sometimes a TSE sound or an ST sound. It's not generally the one for that. There's another letter better for that. It means a sign or a mark. Our English equivalent would be a tab or a reference to itself, sub, lower. To cut out of, to engrave. This is to lift out, to separate out, to cut from the outside. To sift, staff, to re-subdivide, a kind of fractal division, recursion, alternation, self-action, external self-action. The mem is internal self-action. Okay? And if we take them together, we have D, Dalet, Mem, and Tav. I take the cognate to be demote, to dissipate, to lower, to pour out, to mote out, if you will, or meet out. It means to measure. It means division and partition, analysis. It means measurement. In fact, it's closely cognate to our word meter. Again, it can't be linguistically so, and it has to be on some other basis. All right, and in fact, if we want to look at our table of multiple meanings for that, of different permutations, we find Dalet, Mem, and Tav with a Vav in there, demut, means a form, a likeness, an image, a similarity. Midot means ethics or morals. Methodists, confessors. Meter, Tad, I don't know how to pronounce it. Tav, Dalet, Mem, Yud, Tav is the word in Hebrew for metaphor or model. A measure, a division, a metaphor, a model. And Tav, Mem, Dalet means to continue and to persevere. It's the idea of replication. It's overall replication, internal replication, and external replication. Okay.
So he's not only doing it in the order of the chart in terms of putting these letters together. It really doesn't matter, it's not necessary that it has to be DMT. It can go all kinds of different permutations of those letters, which there are so many possibilities, but we're trying to find meaning. That's the key, and that's what Stan was looking for. And I think Levanah alluded before to that it was just before he was developing the hand gestures, and it was important to have those meanings to make the gestures real, to have to be relevant. So Adele, I want to turn to you because I know Dalet has a special. You have a special affinity. We all have affinity with certain letters. And Dalet, you've talked about before, but I'd like you to, go ahead and talk about that letter.
Well, the gesture is this, comes kind of under the collarbones. And you do it higher, Levanah?
Well, I do, but this is what's important, because if you're holding the hand model, then wherever your eyes are, you're looking at the model.
Yeah. So
And if
to
you're looking
distinguish
down,
it from hey, which is higher, I usually do Dalet a little lower. But in any case, the elbows kind of droop, whereas hey, the elbows come up.
Yeah.
So there's sort of a downward pouring in Dalet that he talks about Dalet as a pouring. And I had to give that a lot of thought because I started with thinking about it as a door. Dalet in Hebrew is door. So it is a door, and he mentions a door. And when I think of a door, I think of a doorway and a threshold. Like, are you going to cross that threshold and go through that door, or are you going to stay where you are? And so I see Dalet as a challenge to cross the threshold, to try out new ideas, to see what you're going to discover. Some people are really good at crossing those thresholds with courage, and others are more hesitant. So it's really such a personal kind of message. Like, how does it resonate in you to have a doorway and be confronted with a doorway? I know Kushner talks about the 4 doors that we pass through to reach different areas of spirituality. And so Dal, the poor man, that begins with the Dalet, is the humble. It's not about glorifying poverty. It's about reducing our own to our own essence without the adornment of things. And to know ourselves on that level is a way to connect to God. And so I think each letter, and especially as you gesture them and you start to embody some feeling. I mean, sometimes I show the letters to a group and I don't say what the letter is or what the meaning is, just what is your response when you actually do the gesture. And it's interesting because different people have different responses if they can just let a word arise from what they're experiencing. But I like the pouring because it feels like a pouring down from above. So when you get to the level of Devekut, that door is within you. That's the door that wants to connect. So
what is that term you just used?
Devekut means connection, or a reaching, a striving to connect to God. So maybe one of you can define that word more readily. I know Rabbi Jeff Roth says Devekut is that realization that we are connected to all that is. So that sense of blur, where we're not separate, but we're united with all that is, that would be a sense of Devekut. So what a high level, we strive for that in meditation or in spirituality, to feel that sense of we are connected to all that is. And that's this every word in Hebrew, just there are worlds inside that word. So I pulled it apart. I said, okay, there's 6 letters in Devekut. What does each letter have to say? And so it just becomes an instant brush as you start to say, okay, I'm on this threshold. Am I going to go through it? And Vav is connection. Like, am I going to connect? Is there love there? Is the love enough to create this moment where I feel connected to all that is? And you can go through each letter. Actually, it's not a Vav. The second letter is a vet. So now we're breaking through the door. We're opening up. We're going through Dalet. Yud is like really coming into presence. So maybe that quiet presence is the way you're going to make that connection. So if you go through each letter, the Vav is in there, but it's at the end before the Tav. And to end with the whole word ending with Tav, which comes right back into heart space and kind of a sense of completion. I went on a journey through all those letters and all those ways to connect. And now I'm just ready to start again. Tav is always ready to start again, back to Aleph. So I find the letters just kind of open up an ongoing drash where I can take in a teaching that maybe I just heard, and suddenly that is going to enter my Dalet. But the reason Dalet was important to me was that I was doing some fiddling with dance choreography. I hadn't quite solidified the concept, and that there were 4 steps across and 4 steps back, and I kept doing this 4 thing. And I just said, I wonder what the 4th letter of the Hebrew alphabet is.
Mhm.
And of course it's Dalet. And now I know the letters, and I know much more than I did in 2016 when that thought came to me. But I ended up creating a dance about Dalet. And that was before I was introduced to Stan's work. So Stan's work created revision after revision of my Dalet dance. So I've probably done 3 or 4 now that are inspired by his investigations. But initially I looked at the Kushner book and I just saw the 4 doorways, and I said, wow, I can start to relate to each of these doorways. A doorway to freedom, what does that mean? And a doorway to humility, a doorway to connection. So anyway, that began a long journey of exploring other letters and creating a longer
It was your door, basically, your door.
It was my door.
Yeah.
Yes. And it's the first letter of my Hebrew name, which also intrigued me, Dahlia. So, yeah.
Very cool.
And I love the idea of that this pouring out, like the river,
Mhm.
because even that, it's like, are you going to stay back, or are you going to, travel out? There's always those questions for yourself at any moment. Am I just happier staying safe, or do I want to see what happens if I go through this
Well, if
pouring
you
out?
go through it, then you're going to come to hay and connect. But anyway, we're not going this direction. We're going this direction. So, because
Yeah.
you can't help it though, because when I'm listening to you and I'm thinking, okay, bait is to break open, and then gimel is movement, and then you come to the door and it opens it up. Yeah. So, but anyway, yeah, let's stick with the direction we're going here in terms of.
And there are drashes about why Gimel is facing away from Dalet. So Gimel being the poor letter, and Dalet facing the back of Gimel. So it's, let's see.
The other way around.
Gimel, Dalet. In any way,
Yeah.
Dalet, Gimel is the one that's giving, and Dalet is the poor who is receiving, and they don't see each other because
Well, wait a minute, let's clarify.
anonymous giving is the highest level. So Dalet is.
No, I think Michael's making a point that
Yeah,
Gimel is kind of
no,
open.
Gimel stands for Gmal Chesed. He's giving to charity. The highest form of charity, according to Rambam, Maimonides, is to give to the poor where they don't know it's coming from and you don't know who you're giving it to.
Exactly.
So that you're just giving it selflessly without an ulterior ego motive. So the Gimel can run, but never sees the one he's giving the charity to. And the charity guy doesn't feel beholden to the giver.
Right. There's no
receiving charity.
shame. There's just receiving. Yeah. And so Gimel's Dalet's back is to the giving Gimel. But these are drashes that come from the shape of the letter and the sequence of the letter. And all of these are clues, the shape of the letter. But for me, meeting Stan, it was the gesture itself that became the story. And the others were interesting, and they continue to, give color to our culture. But the contribution of actually embodying a letter through its gesture opened many more drashes that seemed more personal to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And since it's a gesture that's based on meaning, there are, a different kind of neurological connections, what that does to your whole system, how it connects to your neurology, your brain, what it does to your whole body understanding. I know that there are other systems out there which are they attempt to show the shapes of the Hebrew letters by making your body imitate the shape of the letter as much as possible.
Right.
And that's a different kind of, that's a whole different approach.
Mhm.
But this approach based on meaning seems to me, and always has seemed to me, to be more, I don't know, fluid, adaptable, basic, um, because I mean, meaning is what we communicate. I wanted to say something earlier, just in terms of thinking, for me, what the gesture of Dalet and its meaning of pouring and pouring out does for me is, if we consider that the energy of the universe pours into us, we need to pour energy out so that more energy can come pouring in. And so that means that the idea of pouring and pouring out isn't, as you say, it's not like to glorify poverty or, impoverishing yourself. By no means. It's allowing more energy to flow through. You have to give out in order to keep things flowing, which is kind of the same thing you were saying. But it's interesting, just to me personally, that that's actually what I get from my elementary rendition of the gesture. I'm not a dancer, Adele's a dancer and a choreographer. You get your whole body involved. And that's a really special piece of knowledge, awareness to bring to our study of these things. Each of us sitting here has their own approach and their own area of expertise, the thing that they've developed, and we can all contribute to, in each in our own way, to our understanding of the universality of this work.
I was just thinking of like the old Tai Chi masters. They are going through in the park, the Tai Chi, and you hardly see them moving, and they're doing the whole thing. And, we beginners, as we learn, this language of Tai Chi, we're learning each gesture and foot movement and all these things. And when you're just like doing it ever so, and I think of Daniel like studying and sort of seeing the gestures in his mind, and that it doesn't have to be a big dance, is what I'm saying. So it can be all of it. It can be a very embodied, full, and it can also be almost the way Stan saw it, is he saw it in his mind. That's why a letter that was behind his back, he could still see it, the letter in his mind. So I think we have to like see the scale of all of it working for us. And that's what I love about this work, is that anybody can do it, even someone who's limited. I remember teaching a little group, and one woman had just had her arm in a sling from a broken wrist, and she was very limited, but she did all the gestures with one hand, and it was so beautiful, and she totally got it. I had another dancer who couldn't raise his arm all of the way. He had a defect at birth. And so when we did something that was symmetrical, his arm was here, and it was so beautiful. We made all the dancers do it asymmetrically, so we would match him, and there was beauty in that. So I'm really all for any way that an audience that's listening to this might dive into these letters. You do not have to be a dancer.
And also, Stan, in one of the videos, tells the audience to close their eyes and put their hands, behind the back, and you always know where your hands are, whether you're sighted or not sighted. And also, in terms of the ability to put your body in the shape of a letter is not easy for most of us, but the hands, you have complete flexibility. And it just enhances the meaning. Daniel, did you have a comment on this, on the Dalet?
Yeah, I mean, well, it's like the whole thing, I mean, there's a lot of things here that I realized just this week right now. It's clear that like Stan and the Meru Foundation is really on to kind of really the essence of the Hebrew language, which is amazing. It came through Stan because he saw the structural and the ideas and the meaning behind it, but he didn't have formal training in the Hebrew language. And And he would never have seen this had he. So he was able to see this entire thing. And it's just, and the reason I say it's like, this is essential to the Hebrew language, a couple of reasons, is the 3-letter roots. I mean, Hebrew is a language of roots that developed over a couple thousand years, maybe more. If you look at the development, there are 2-letter roots and there are 3-letter roots, and they're mostly, I think, 3-letter roots now. And so the 3-letter roots is really, really, it's really just like the basis of the Hebrew language. So, and then you combine roots and you put prefixes and suffixes, and Hebrew was born. It's actually, in that way, if you put some effort into it, it's actually, I think, one of the easier languages to learn, because it's really simple. You're just putting letters together and combining and putting things before and after, and it's kind of like a very simple puzzle in a way. It's hard, I think, for English speakers or whatever the Romance languages, because it's going that way. So but the other thing is that what's amazing about this is I wrote this down while Stan was talking. All parts of a given process are considered equal. And I say that because in classical Kabbalah, this is real. The classical Kabbalists assume that these letters are interchangeable when they make an interpretation of a sacred text. And they do that, and that's completely accepted, which means that all parts of this process are equal to them. To the point that if you substitute a mem for a dalet, or a tav for a dalet, or a mem for a tav, and etc., like it's not only totally kosher, it's like, go ahead, yeah, because they're the same. And so what Stan's adding to this conversation is like a deeper revelation, which is that, like, that's how life is, right? All parts of the process are equal. And that relates to, of course, again, it's one system that relates succinctly to the centrality of God's name, of a yud and a hey and a vav and a hey, right? Because the simple kavanah of that name is was, is, will be, and is master of all. So meaning beyond time, we're in control, entirely one, time is one. The Shefatal adds on to that and says, yeah, but it's also the infinite light, the infinite loving light of a completely loving and accepting God. Right? So it's one system that Stan got onto, and therefore, now keeping that in mind, when you go back to the 3-letter roots that Hebrew uses now and has developed, that's the whole basis for modern Hebrew. I mean, as was the basis for the Hebrew became before that in rabbinic texts. It's clear that, like, the broadness of what is going on here in what Stan found, and therefore the shape itself, and the movements, and it just explains why what they'll just said, that we can all relate to them on whatever level we're coming from, because that's how our lives are. We relate to things on the level we're coming from, for good or bad, and so this is a device, which Stan used that word quite intentionally, as it's referenced in the Kuzari. This is a device, the hand model, that allows, like, I would say, not only the development of understanding of Hebrew on whatever level you're at, but it also allows for a sacred development of your mind, and that if you do these gestures and you take words and you think about them and you do the gestures in whatever way you can, it starts to change. It would, if this was like a daily practice, it would start to change the way you'll see reality itself. So this, again, there's so many connection upon connection upon connection. It's like, this gets back to the original concept and the original question that how is this a sacred alphabet? Well, this is how it's a sacred alphabet, anyway, I have other ideas, but that's basically what I wanted to say.
Yeah. And Michael,
Well, the expression Elu va'elu, which means these and those are all the words of God, is exactly what Daniel was just talking about, that whether you come at it from this way or that way, up, down, left, right, All of these are correct, and that is the beauty of it. So let me start by commenting on Dahlia, which is through the humbleness, the poor quality. You're in search of the Yud Hey. You're in search of God through your name itself is an embodiment of that idea. So it's a perfect name for you.
Thank you.
Now, I don't know where the
No
I,
one ever
you see, you
said
got
that
you have to
before.
get rid of the you have to get rid of the I at the beginning of your name. You got to get rid of the ego and be poor. Then you become the Tao, and then you reach to the Ya. So there you go.
You don't have to
Now,
get rid of the I in front of your name. Yeah, sorry.
Well, it's
but
the
no, not in your name, but
Dahlia
it's
didn't really come from Idel.
yeah.
I was not given a Hebrew name. My parents just were tired,
Well,
I think,
then
by
it
the
was a
time I
better.
came along, and they omitted giving me a Hebrew name. So when my daughter was named, the rabbi there said, "Okay, what's your Hebrew name?" Because he wanted to say everything in Hebrew, as
Yep.
he gave her the name. And I said, "I don't have one." He said, "Impossible. Ask your parents. They're sitting in the front row." I go down and talk to my parents, and they said, "No, we never gave you a
Nothing.
Hebrew name."
Yeah.
So I gave myself Dahlia. It was a name that just was in a song I learned at camp. Hey, hey, Dahlia. And I didn't really give it a lot of thought because he said, "Okay, what's your name?" You know, he's looking at the time, like, hurry up, make a decision. I said, "Okay, Dahlia. My name's Dahlia." And nobody
But
has said,
it's a perfect
Dal
name.
is the
It's the
poor, and then
yes.
the
It's
Yud
the
Hey ending it.
just change the how you pronounce the vowels.
Saw
Yeah,
that because I
the
just thought of
journey
it as a
from
flower.
ego to egolessness and to
Yeah.
God. It's a perfect flow. But what I wanted to say was that if you read these three letters backward, you have one that was not really in Stan's list, which is Tamid. The Ner Tamid is the eternal light that hangs in every synagogue everywhere. And using all of the various words that you've chosen here, it's an outpouring through the four worlds, the Dalet, okay, into the liquid world, which is the world of our body, which is mostly water, and the world, which is mostly water, to leave a sign or a mark or a seal, which the letter Taf is used in the Bible as a seal, like a chotemet, like, you know, if you were Chinese and you signed the thing and then you put your seal on it. And it starts with the Tao, with the poor man, which is a portal. And of course, Dalet is Dalet, is doorway. So it's a portal, but it's a two-way doorway. You work through the spiritual world, the four worlds that are talked about, so that Dalet stays in there. And if we start with going from Tamid first to get through the four worlds, chasing the Yud, we're chasing that spark of divinity. The Yud, we determined in the Aleph Yud Kuf, is 10, and the 10 Sfirot, and the fingers that God created the world with, metaphorically. So it's actually following the same journey of Adele's name in doing that we're starting by becoming small, by becoming poor, by becoming humble, so that we go through those doors. And that's, from God's perspective, that's what God was doing. He created these doorways, and through a water world, through our water body, and put that seal within each of us for us to then climb back to him. It's exactly what the little thing I said about her name, about your name, Adele, is exactly the process for all of us in some way. Now that Yud, that water, that liquid, is a vibration. It can vibrate as music. It can vibrate as movement. It can vibrate in healing. It can vibrate in a lot of different directions. And so these four letters have started from the singularity of Aleph down to, okay, let's buckle down here, guys. Now God is sending it down into the world of multiplicity, and the ultra multiplicity is tough. Is that final letter that is the the seal of creation. Now we have to somehow climb up and down that ladder. So these letters, as all of them do, I mean, you can see each of these triptychs as another ladder, but this is a very clear picture of a ladder of the human journey, and the human challenge is to connect that way.
Well, let's get a little
So-
bit more involved in
Little
those.
esoteric, yes, okay.
No, that was really valuable, Michael, in terms of spelling out those three. But let's get even more involved in, because you talked about water. So let's look at the mem. And what's interesting about the mem is we haven't talked about the final letters yet, and we will next time, because it's the third one. The third one up is the first final letter, but mem has a final letter also, which is the expanse from the womb, but it is related to water because of the word mayim, where you have the two mems. So how does that fit in to this paradigm? Let's go even more in terms of what Michael opened up here, because we do want to, kind of explore the relationship between these three letters as Stan did. Anybody have affinity with mem? Because I sure do.
Why don't you start then?
Yeah,
Well,
please.
no, I'm a water person, and I just love the water, and so I relate to both versions of the mem and the final mem, from inner to outer, as expressive. And in this case, we're looking at the inner spiritual, and the one on the chart, and I'll put that up for our audience. He's showing a womb.
Mm-hmm.
It's where we begin, where we start, where it all begins.
Yeah, no, I just remember Stan saying that we go from womb to womb. That we come from a womb, but then that this world is also a womb, and that when we leave the world, we've reached a higher stage.
And through this letter,
Amazing, yeah.
Placement of this letter, he's looking at the spiritual aspect.
Yeah, and just going from one experience that reforms us to another, infinitely. I think that was what we talked about when he mentioned that. Sad to say.
If you take the final mem and you spin it into 3 dimensions, you get a depth perspective. You basically have a cup, a beaker, that would contain water. The regular mem has a little space at the bottom. Okay. And the expression we have in English, which is, oh, my water broke.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So you have a vessel that contains it on some higher level. And then when we come down into the lower mem, as it were, not the final mem, as it comes down, there's an opening. The water breaks and comes down into our water body, into our water world. And the final letter of the word womb is rechem, which is the root of rachamim, compassion and nurturing. So that's where the mother, as it were, and ima, which was already mentioned as mother, and mayim, which is like 2 mems that are holding the spark. First holding it on some higher level, then the portal opens, and the little space at the bottom of the mem is that opening of the womb where the new child comes into the world.
This is a really deep one, because you basically, if what I said before is true, and if we have this concept that past, present, and future are all one. So the pouring out of our soul into this world, and then the holding of it, the expanse. You're in the world, right? But you're in the womb, the big womb, right? And then you finally figure it out. Well, if you study, there's a very serious scientific study of near-death experiences, and one of the things that the light that people often see, and beyond that, often makes things quite clear. but at that point in a limited way, because they come back. But let's assume that when we should all live long, we should be well. But let's assume when we go, we really get this incredible kind of enlightenment. There's light there. There's understanding. There's fulfillment on a deeper level than of our entire progress through life. So if past, present, and future are the same, it could be that the realizations we have during our life come from after we leave the world.
And there's your spiritual perspective.
Yeah, and that's the whole progression from pouring out into the wider expanse to come to an understanding of yourself, a mark of distinction, right? Who you really are, who you actually are. And the Kabbalists talk about this. And what's interesting is the Kabbalistic ideas about what I'm talking about line up almost precisely with the study of near-death experiences, as that's true in many faiths, actually. But it just this is such a deep progression.
It is. I want to take
if you go back to that chart for a second.
Yeah. I mean, I wanted to take, again, you can't help talking about these letters without looking at the shapes. And I'll have a close-up of the mem here. I mean, first of all, you were saying about pouring out. See the little opening there? The bottom.
It's the birth canal. Yeah.
And then what do you have at the top is the yud. The yud is always there somewhere. And I mean, and you can draw a lot of conclusions for that, but it just seems like the right shape for that letter. You look
what you have on the bottom line. When you go to the final mem, I mean, we're not there yet, but over here you have the final mem.
Right.
Okay. And what he's got is great C. That was the microcosm. This is the macrocosm. This is coming from the infinite, which is up here in this final letter, coming back down to here.
Actually, if you take a look at the way the letter itself is spelled, which is mem, final mem, what Stanley had, basically is mem is from source, final mem is expanse. So you're from the expanse is exactly what Daniel was just saying, that we are born into this world from the expanse of the infinite. That's and if I'm just looking at the spelling of the letter mem, which is mem, final mem, and if you take those two letters as a word, that's what it means.
Wow.
Yeah, actually on that chart, I mean on the chart that Stan was showing, he actually does have the letters spelled out. Let's go back again to the chart.
I think you need to see the gestures too.
So,
Sure.
This is mem. It's
right.
Right under the throat, and I feel like source, our own voice, our own essence is coming through mem, and then the hands come out, and you can't see, but the palm is facing forward, and it's the expanse straight across the body as the final mem. So
and don't forget,
gesture, you really notice, like, yes, I come from the source and I flow out to the source.
Yeah, and don't forget that it's not just you putting your hands up there, that if he's got the model, he's seeing the letter mem.
Yes,
that
see the letter mem.
Only place he sees the letter mem is that position. That's what's crazy about this.
Yeah, and you can do it in your, and you really can do it in your mind when you do. You kind of have to close your eyes in a way, and like really think of that shape and how it relates to the hand model. It's quite amazing, actually.
In the story of Jacob's ladder, it talks about he came to a makom, and that word makom shows up 5-6 times during that short number of sentences that explain what he went through. And it wasn't just that he came to a place. It didn't need to repeat that over and over again. Okay. In the end, he realized it was Sha'ar HaShamayim. It was the gate. This is not just a place. This is the gateway, the doorway, the portal to heaven. And the word that we use is makom. And it's one of the words we use to refer to God, hamakom, because he made the tzimtzum, he made the, inside of the unity, he created a bubble, and we're all inside the bubble. And all the souls and all the angels are all inside the bubble. And that word makom begins with a mem, a regular mem, and ends with a final mem.
And what's
It's
the
as if
letter?
to say, okay, guys, this is it.
Is that a cough in
This is the
between?
big ocean.
What are the
There's
letters
a
that
kuf.
make up?
Kuf.
What is,
Kuf.
Kuf and Vav,
This
which is
is
Kav, which according to
Oh, it's a Kav.
Kabbalists,
Yeah.
God made this bubble, and
Right,
then he
they
put a
drew
Kav,
line. Yeah.
a line through which he poured all of the divinity into the world.
Oh,
And it
that's
shattered, and we
nice.
had to find the sparks.
Amazing.
So there's a Kav in between the two mems.
Wow.
And that was where
Is it a cub or a coof?
his head was when he
The
saw
kuf, like the monkey. Kuf.
Yeah, it's a
Kuf.
coof.
Oh,
Kuf, yeah.
kuf.
It's a
Kuf,
kuf.
yeah.
It's a
Kuf.
kuf, not a cuff.
Kuf,
It's a
that's what I
kuf
said
and a
first.
vav.
Kuf, yeah.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
a kuf and a vav, which spells the word kav, which means line.
I
So,
see.
This
Uh-huh.
that's what I'm saying. This is
Goodness.
like,
Wow.
this is the
Oh, 'cause you have to
funnel
have
that you're bringing through, creating this. This
Huh.
is the world you got. This is where we're putting you. Okay, go up and down the ladder. See the angels going up. See the angels going down.
Yeah.
And so, what do you say when you're at a shiva? If you pay a shiva call, you say there's a formula that we say when we leave. Hamakom yinachem etchem. That God, hamakom, not rachamim, not the womb, the makom, hamakom yinachem etchem. Why will that place that we're
Translate
talking
it.
about, this expanded thing, why will that place comfort you among the mourners of Zion and Israel? And the answer is because everything is in that makom. All the souls, the guy who died, whose soul is out there, he's still part of the same makom you're in. And so it brings comfort to the mourner.
yeah.
And it brings comfort to the soul who says, what happened, everybody? I'm lost. Oh, wait a minute. I look down there. They're in the same makom I'm in.
Very cool.
So it's a perfect formula if you look at the depth of the word makom
Right.
as one of the words that the Kabbalists don't see any of these words, even the Yud Kei Vav Kei, as God. They call God Ein Sof, infinite, like beyond knowing. But all of the names have different qualities. Like Yud Kei Vav Kei is chesed, is love, whereas Elokim is strength, because those are the forces within the world. But in the big picture, it's the makom.
Right.
And that brings comfort to all of us because it means we're never alone.
Very cool. Before we
That's
run
awesome.
out of time, before we run out of time, I don't want to miss out on the letter Tav, because poor little Tav, always at the end, always forgotten, but it's he describes this as a mark or in itself. We're now in the outer physical realm. Let's see the Tav, Adele.
So the Tav is almost looks like a heart, the negative space. And I think Stan said all the fingers are falling on top of each other. There's a sense of weight of the fingers, one on top of the other toward and you're touching the chest. Isn't that true?
How many of the letters touch? How many of the letters where both hands touch? I know, like when you're doing this, the hands are not touching. They're two separate hands.
Samach is,
Stomach.
there's quite a few.
Okay.
Vav touches. Anyway, Tav, it's
It
usually
looks like the
coming from
heart.
some other letter. Like
Right.
in this case, if we wanted to make it come from mem, it's going to tumble right down and fall. And it's usually
heart.
out to in or up to down. And it's just a really nice sort of landing into Tav. But anyway, that's the gesture. And
But it's the heart. It's the heart at the heart.
it's at the heart.
And yeah, I mean, it looks like when you first put your hands like that, that's, now everybody goes, I love you. They're going like this and they're showing a Valentine shaped heart.
Right.
So,
It's not like that where I'm making a heart, but it's sort of
right.
like,
Yeah.
yeah, it just sort of is like a heart, but it's completion. a
I would-
mark,
Well,
but it's always starting again, because from Tav, we're gonna go back to Aleph. So there's a
Right,
sense
'cause
of
we're looking at
completion,
the-
but then we move again. We always move again.
right, because we're looking now at the 22 letters, the original letters before the final
Yeah.
letters, as kind of a final end of that 22 letter run is kind of the mark. It's kind of, okay, we've gone through all these, now let's put a stamp on it. And it becomes like the thing that holds together from the Aleph.
Bill,
Just,
you can't,
yeah,
there's
yeah.
one thing you can't avoid.
yeah,
The Taf is the last letter of the word emet, truth.
mm,
Okay, this is the truth of the world. There's a truth in the world. It starts with an aleph, which is the first letter of the alphabet. It ends with a taf, and the middle letter of the alphabet is our mem again.
mhm,
And they all have two legs that they're standing on. So the rabbis teach that the word sheker, lie, has a point at the bottom of the shin, a point at the bottom of the kuf, and a point at the bottom of the resh. So it's not always in perfect balance. A lie will always get you off balance, but emet has two legs for all three letters, six legs to the stool. And as a result, the truth is and it ends with the top. But yes, and then, as Adele said, it goes back to the aleph again in the 22 letter version.
Well, it's also, I mean, it's like you listen, being a student of composers and composition and music history, like what's so special about Bach, for example? I mean, there are plenty of composers of that time period that did like great things that were really like, and at the time were more popular than he was by a lot. And like, but what, and they were good, they're great and unbelievable. And it's like, it's that mark of distinction. There's just this like slight thing that's like, it's like different. It's following the same rules but it's different. It's got something. And every great composer has that.
this importance of the mark of distinction, I think is really important in looking at the Tav. Can we see the hand gesture again of Tav? Yeah, the heart. You folks at home can join along with Adele if you want to.
We did Dalet, and then we did Mem, and then we do Tav. It's very contained right here, all three letters.
Tav is comprised of
interesting.
Tav and Vav.
Yeah, Tav Vav.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, we can't help
What did
getting
you say
into
about
this.
Vav?
What?
What did you just say about Vav?
But the letter Tav is spelled Tav Vav.
Oh, that's how we spell it. So then we would have a little, very interesting, we would go here and we would rise up.
Oh
Kind
man,
of be beautiful. Tav rises up.
there's the mark.
And connecting
Yeah,
the brain
I
and the
like
heart.
that idea. Sort
There
of
you
the
go. Yes,
elevating.
Michael.
Yeah.
Elevating,
The
and
code,
also in
yep.
a sense sealing up.
Yeah.
As a part, Tav is a letter of reflection. And so if you're sealing it up, I wish I was more fluent with all of this,
And we
but
also have love that is part of any Vav connection. So to see that mark as, also connecting
Connecting,
through our
yeah.
spine. And this is something, Stan didn't really know the Hebrew language, and yet he has opened up so much for me by recognizing which letters serve as prefixes and have meaning all by themselves when attached to a word. And so the Vav is the and just that he said Dalet was that. It's like, I don't know, shall we go through that threshold? It's just ways to like play with the letters to see the meaning of the suffixes.
It's unusual about
or-
Hebrew, though,
or
that it does
prefixes.
that.
What is
Because
that?
Hebrew does that. Like if you
What's
wanted to say
prefix?
from that place, from that Torah, okay,
Yeah.
or from that light,
Zot.
you would have three
Isn't
words in
zot
English,
that?
but you have midioraisa. You have from that light,
Yeah.
that source of light. It's like the words get a letter, which normally has its own independence, also becomes a preposition.
Right.
From
Right,
that
because
to
the
that, with
preposition,
that.
the prefixes
The
are
letter is
prepositions.
also a preposition.
Yeah, like
Many
bet
of them.
is
Yeah.
in or with. And so we start to
Yes.
see the meanings of the letters through the meaning of those prepositions that he calls prefixes. Yeah, they're prepositions. It's
Yeah.
very
Yeah.
interesting that he
Modifiers in
was
some
moved
way
by
of
that.
the root. You know, the root exists, and then the preceding letter and following letter, let's just put it
Yes.
that way,
Yeah.
each in their own way modify the meaning of the root.
Yes.
Not its basic meaning, but you know, they add a direction in a sense, or you know, timing or something like that.
Yeah, it's a very unusual language.
It's
Yeah.
funny, you know, so I think, Michael, you mentioned Torah, the letters that make up Torah. Tav, Resh, Hey.
Tough vav resh hey.
Who can?
Oh, you have to have the
Well,
above
ta-
the, oh,
Yeah, when
And
you have Tav
there's
at
one
the
of those
beginning,
switches.
Tav. The
Tav
letter
is
Tav is
Tav.
spelled out at the beginning of Torah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and as
Yeah.
Dan mentioned earlier, sometimes we swap them. So Aleph and Tav are the first and the last in the Atbash, where you're
That's
combining the first letter and the
that's
last
a
letter.
later system
That's
than
why
the
we say,
current
yeah,
one.
that's why
but
we
yeah,
say
that we're talking
Torah
about.
or. Torah, Tor, or.
Yeah.
One is the Torah, but where did it come from? From or. And what does it bring to the world? Or. It brings light. So the
There's
words
so
are
many ways.
connected. The Hebrew's amazing that way.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
funny.
incredible. I mean, you have the Tav, the letter Tav. You have a Resh, which is your head, you know, or the
Rushing
head.
out. It's also
Well, it's
rushing
just
out.
but I mean, yeah, I mean, it's focused on consciousness. I mean, the Tav,
Yeah.
it has to, first thing about the word Torah is it has to do with you. This is not some alt system that has nothing to do with you.
Right.
This is something, if it doesn't have to do with you, if someone's teaching you Torah and it doesn't have to do with you, you should leave. Because it has to do with you specifically. And I've taught different classes in Torah and in rabbinics for many years. And the one thing I always notice, if you leave space for the individual, and this is true in all teaching, if you leave space for the individual, the Tav, you will discover that they have an insight that is supernatural, that it's unbelievable. People who know nothing, if you show them something, a text or something, it's like, and you give them space to interpret it for themselves, the things that people come up with is absolutely mind-blowing. So the first thing is it has to do with you, and it has to do with each specific person in that one way. And then the next is it has to do with your head. You use your head, you know, and then use it to make a connection to hey.
You know, you reminded me of something when you said that, you know, looking at the chart and the letters and the meanings, that when you say the head, on the chart under Resh, Stan has head and he has rush out. Two different,
Yeah.
one is a noun, one's a verb.
Hmm.
I think we have to look at all the letters like that. Stan made a
Interesting.
huge point about saying God is a verb, like bait is housing, it's a house, but it's housing what a house does, contrast between inside and out. And so I think we always have to keep in mind, what is the verb? What is happening? What is occurring? Life is, you know, continuous, always moving, but there is a noun also that has meaning. So we always have to keep that in mind, because that was
Very
important to
interesting.
Stan, in terms of seeing the action, what's happening, what's real, what's always occurring in the world.
Right, well.
With Tav, it's he's got a mark, he's got itself, it's a stamp.
perfecting,
Yeah, you know,
creating. I mean, it's all.
so much.
Recognizing yourself, you know, recognizing who you are. I mean,
Yeah,
you know,
he does.
the
he
head
talks
is
about
using your
self
head. I mean,
referral.
it's not, you know.
And later, you know, he kind of refined that down to be tough, being a line of self-reflective, a line of reflection.
Oh, interesting. Huh.
Well, I think we've exhausted it for today.
Wow.
Beautiful
Oh
discussion.
man,
Thank you so much
what
from
a,
you
what a
guys.
discussion!
Thank
Wow.
you.
Well, it was
Amazing.
Adele's favorite letter, so we
Yeah,
just
What
well,
started it, definitely.
I
you
told
know.
Been
Adele,
there.
if she hadn't been here, I would have skipped that column today and come back to it when she
That
was.
would have thrown the entire universe into
That's right.
total chaos.
Disorder.
Can't do
Yeah.
that.
I really,
Not so much light to it, you know.
you
Like
know,
I
I
have
almost don't want to do
that.
this show, this program, if one of you aren't available, because everybody just contributes so much, and when you're not here, you know, I remember last time Michael wasn't here, and Adele, I wish Adele was here, I wish Michael was here, you know, it's like we really miss not having you guys. So maybe we may have to adapt our programming here to make sure everybody's included, but we have a life, we have schedules, and you know, we do the best we can.
If the power goes out.
The power goes out, which could happen today with the
Terrifying,
yeah.
weekend. So anyway, thanks for joining us once again. We had a stirring dialogue, and we have more to come. Next time we're going to be talking about hay, which we did talk about today. Nun, which, whoa, Nun's right in the center there. It represents a lot. And we're going to deal with the first final letter, which is the final cough, and see how those final letters are an outer expression of the root letter that it represents. So, but for today, thank you for joining, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye. Take care. Michael, give us a wave. We got to have a wave.
There we go.
Take care. Bye-bye.